Marsha Duvall had cleaned the same office for 8 years, but today when she walked in, everyone suddenly went quiet. On the CEO's desk sat a used syringe, and no one else seemed to notice the tremor in his hands. She tried to warn them, but they laughed, called her just the Maid. Hours later, he collapsed live on camera, and what she found in his tea would turn the whole company upside down. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The scent of lemon polish clung to the air like a quiet signature. Marsha Duvall's signature. She moved through the sprawling mansion of Grace and Lorne, with quiet efficiency, never intruding, never interrupting. Her shoes barely made a sound on the marble floors, and her eyes never met theirs unless spoken to. A lifetime of silent conditioning. That morning, the drawing room had been transformed into a makeshift boardroom. Men and women in tailored suits filled the long table, their voices sharp and clipped, brimming with the kind of false urgency that came with six-figure bonuses. The CEO of Lorne Tech, Grayson Lorne himself, sat at the head of the table. Sunlight filtered through the high glass windows behind him, casting him in a glow more divine than executive. But it wasn't the golden light Marsha noticed, it was the sag in his shoulders. She moved past them with her tray, water glasses clinking faintly. No one acknowledged her. Conversations paused mid-sentence, as she entered, then resumed once she passed. A few looked through her. One exec made a joke about fresh air finally arriving, and the room chuckled, not at the joke, but at the comfort of having someone else nearby to be beneath them. Marsha placed the last glass beside Grayson, and lingered a beat longer than usual. His eyes were bloodshot, skin a shade paler than his usual almond tan. She noticed the subtle tremble in his fingers, as he reached for the glass. He didn't look at her. He never did. Marsha Duvall wasn't always invisible. There was a time, years ago, when she had been a nurse. Licensed, trusted, needed. She had walked into rooms where patients' families turned to her for answers. She'd held hands through pain, guided them through recovery, loss, peace. Then came the lie. A wealthy patient's wife accused her of inappropriate handling. Said it made them uncomfortable. No specifics, just that phrase. Made them uncomfortable. No union. No defense. Just an exit interview in silence. Her nursing license was suspended pending investigation that never went anywhere. She waited for a reinstatement that never came. And so she cleaned. Marsha folded her hands in front of her apron, as she stood by the door, waiting for the meeting to end. Her posture was perfect, her eyes downcast. She was a part of the wallpaper, but her mind was a live wire. Grayson was slipping. She could see it. Hear it in the way his voice strained when presenting figures. His speech, usually sharp and dynamic, came slower today, almost unsure. When the others cracked jokes, he laughed half a second too late. They didn't see it. Or maybe they didn't want to. After the meeting, she moved to clean up. The executives filed out without looking at her. A woman with a clipboard walked right through the spot. Marsha was cleaning, muttering something about dead weight in the company, oblivious to the irony. Marsha cleared the glasses carefully. Grayson had left his half full. She studied it, then poured it out slowly in the kitchen sink, noting the faint cloudiness in the liquid. But it was probably just the sunlight. Probably. Later that day, Marsha passed the office again. The door was cracked open. Grayson sat alone at his desk, staring not at his laptop but through it. His hand trembled as he reached for his tea. A flicker of hesitation, then he drank. Marsha moved on. Cleaning was constant. It wasn't until that evening, emptying the trash in the guest bathroom off the study, that she saw it. Something odd at the bottom of the bin, hidden beneath tissues and a wrapper from an energy bar. She pulled it out with the corner of her glove. A syringe. Crushed. Her hands froze. No prescription label. No cap. The type used for injections in secret. Not insulin. She'd handled enough in her nursing days to know. This was something else. Why was it here? Who had used it? She glanced back toward the office. The light was off. The hallway silent. Marsha stood there, her breath held, heart tightening. They saw her as background noise. A blur. A nobody. But now, she knew something no one else did. Marsha opens the trash and finds something that doesn't belong. A crushed syringe. Marsha Duvall stood alone in the small laundry room, tucked behind the kitchen, the crushed syringe weighing down her gloved hand. Her breath came in shallow waves. A slow, creeping unease tightened around her chest like a rope being pulled inch by inch. She had seen syringes before, countless in fact, but never one left behind this carelessly. And never in a home like this, where image was everything. She placed the syringe into a sealed plastic bag and buried it deep in the garbage, hiding it beneath the usual scraps of domestic life: apple cores, coffee filters, shredded receipts. She wasn't sure why she didn't throw it out completely. Not yet. Something told her to hold on to the knowledge a little longer, to watch, to wait. It wasn't until later that night, when she passed by the butler's pantry and smelled it, that sour, metallic, almost sweet tang of spoiled insulin, that everything came rushing back. Georgia. Marsha was 41 then. Confident. Respected. A licensed in-home nurse, with a reputation for discretion and warmth. Her client was Eleanor Carrington, the matriarch of a Southern banking dynasty. Eleanor suffered from advanced diabetes and early-onset dementia, and Marsha had been brought in to manage both. At first, things were smooth. Marsha's care helped stabilize Eleanor's blood sugar, her mood, her sense of time. But after 6 months, the dynamic began to shift. Not with Eleanor, but with Eleanor's daughter, Virginia, a woman with honey blonde hair, frosty blue eyes, and a fragile ego masked by Southern charm. Virginia didn't like how close Marsha had become to her mother. Didn't like the way Eleanor reached for Marsha's hand, instead of hers. She once asked Marsha not to wear her headscarf to work anymore, claiming it startled the help. Another time she asked Marsha to use the back entrance just for optics. Marsha, biting back her pride, complied. Then came the complaint. Mom said the nurse touched her inappropriately. Virginia told the agency. She's been very confused lately, but you can never be too careful. No investigation, no interview, no defense. Marsha was let go by the end of the week. The agency called it a mutual parting. She was blacklisted in 3 counties within the month. No job, no appeal, just silence. Back in the present, the faint insulin scent had pulled Marsha into that memory like a hook. She stood now in Grayson's second-floor bathroom, trash bin in one hand, nose twitching. The smell wasn't strong, but it was unmistakable. Insulin. Decaying, used and discarded, a chemical fingerprint. Grayson didn't have diabetes. That much she knew. There were no testing strips in the drawers, no glucose monitors on his nightstand. His fridge didn't contain orange juice or sugar tabs, and he'd never requested low-carb meals. Marsha had cooked for him on nights when his personal chef was away. He was particular about his tea, his salt intake, but never his sugar. So why the insulin? She began quietly watching him. Not in a nosy way, but carefully. Like she'd done with patients in hospice who couldn't speak but were always telling her something anyway. Grayson's movements were slower. He blinked more often, rubbed his eyes during the morning hours. At lunch he barely touched his food, and by late afternoon, his hand would sometimes hover over his temple for a beat too long before he continued typing. He'd brush off questions from his assistant with vague replies. Didn't sleep well, must be stress, too much travel lately. But Marsha saw through it, not because she was smarter than the others, but because she was used to watching what others chose to ignore. 2 days later, as she changed the linens in the guest room, she overheard them. The VP, Kyle Trammell, young, sharp, always in a too-tight suit, and Bethany, the head of public relations. Their voices were low but tense, slicing through the hallway just outside the closed door. "He's slipping," Kyle whispered, "and if he keeps slipping, the board's gonna force a transition." Bethany's voice dropped even lower. "We need him out before Q4. If he drags down our public valuation again, we won't recover before the merger. He won't step down on his own." There was a pause. "Then maybe," Kyle said slowly. "He doesn't need to." Marsha froze, her hand halfway tucked under the mattress. The sheets no longer mattered. The smell in the bathroom, the tremors, the cloudy water, the syringe. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't stress or age or insomnia. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. That evening, after dinner service, Marsha cleared the plates and made her way toward the kitchen. Grayson was in his study, door slightly ajar. Kyle sat across from him, voice full of polite venom. "Your decisions lately have raised eyebrows, Gray. Maybe it's time to consider stepping back for a bit. Take care of yourself. We can hold the reins." Grayson didn't respond. His head dipped. Marsha couldn't see his face. The clinking of dishes covered her footsteps as she walked away, but her heart pounded so loudly it could have broken the silence on its own. The next morning, she took a risk. While polishing the wood trim near the conference room, she spoke aloud softly, cautiously to Bethany, who was passing by with a tablet in hand. "Mr. Lorne hasn't looked well lately," Marsha said. "I used to be a nurse. And I—" Bethany didn't stop walking. "Stick to cleaning, sweetheart," she said without looking back. The words were a slap. Not just for their content, but for how casual they were. Practiced, dismissive, almost bored. That was how they saw her. Even now, she went back to her work, hands moving automatically, eyes blurred with silent rage.
They didn't see her.
But they would. Marsha secretly overhears a conversation in the hallway. Someone inside the company wants Grayson gone. Marsha moved with a new kind of caution now. Not the practiced carefulness of a maid used to being overlooked, but the deliberate silence of someone who had begun to uncover a truth not meant for them. The crushed syringe, the smell of spoiled insulin, the whispered conversation about Grayson's decline, none of it felt accidental anymore. Something dark was unfolding in this house, and Marsha had stumbled too close to it. But if what she suspected was true, she wasn't the first. There had been another maid before her, a quiet young woman named Cynthia. Marsha had only heard her name once, in passing when the kitchen assistant muttered, "Cynthia never did the glasses right either." The tone was dismissive, almost resentful, but something about the sentence lingered in Marsha's mind. She waited until the house was mostly empty that Thursday afternoon. The executive team was out at a leadership summit. Grayson had retreated to his bedroom, and the cleaning schedule was light. Marsha took her time dusting the office. She didn't rush when she reached the lower drawer of the large oak filing cabinet. It was where she had once seen the head of operations stuff receipts and old schedules during a rushed meeting cleanup. If Cynthia had left anything behind, it would be there. She eased the drawer open. Folders, spare printer ink, a company-branded thermos, and wedged in between the paper files, folded, worn, but unmistakable, was a pay stub. Cynthia Morales. Final pay, $2,700. The sum stood out. It was nearly double the usual biweekly maid's salary. Marsha stared at it, her brow furrowing. The pay date was from 4 months ago, exactly 2 weeks before Marsha was hired. There was no separation letter, no resignation slip, just one unusually large payment, and silence. Marsha knew not to ask questions too loudly. The walls of houses like this had a way of echoing the wrong words, in the wrong ears. But there was one person who might know something, and who, like her, wasn't quite part of the sleek whispering machinery that made up Lorne Tech's household staff. Raphael. He was the gardener. Quiet, brown-skinned, and always dressed in a faded green jumpsuit. He spoke little English, but understood more than he let on. Marsha caught him near the tool shed, later that afternoon, wiping dirt from his gloves. She approached slowly, gently, like she would with a patient not yet ready to speak. "Cynthia, the girl before me. You remember her?" Raphael paused. His eyes narrowed slightly. Then, without a word, he reached into his pocket and handed Marsha a folded cloth inside it, a bobby pin. Long black, hair still curled at the tip. "Her hair," he said softly, then looked around to make sure no one was watching. "She cry. Last day. Much crying. Then gone." Marsha opened her mouth to ask more, but Raphael held up a hand. "Watch yourself," he said. "This house, it forget people." And with that he turned away. The warning hit her like a chill. This house forgets people. That night Marsha didn't sleep much. She took out one of her old journals, a small leather notebook she used to keep back when she was nursing. It had sat in her purse for years, untouched, a relic from another life. She began using it again. Grayson. 8 Tharonshin. Breakfast untouched. Pale. Shaky. Kyle Bethany. 8/8/16. Discussed removing Grayson. Cynthia Morales. Fired or silenced. Paid double. Disappeared. Syringe. Insulin smell. Trash bin. The notebook became her shield, her sanity. No one could see her writing. Tucked safely in her room after hours. But she documented everything. What he ate, who visited, which items showed up or vanished. She began to move differently, more alert, listening to silences as much as sounds. On Sunday she found something else. Hidden beneath a stack of stale linen towels in the basement storage room, folded and pushed against the back wall, was a black cleaning apron. It was too small for Marsha's frame, and definitely not hers. The tag read, She didn't take it, didn't dare. But she stood there for a moment, staring at the folded cloth, the absence of a body within it. Cynthia had been here. Cynthia had vanished, and no one had asked a single question. That night, as she turned off the lamp beside her narrow bed and set her notebook beneath the mattress, something slid under her door. She froze. She waited a long minute before reaching for it. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded the square of paper. The writing was blocky, printed in all caps with a black ink pen. "Stop asking questions." Her hand fell to her side. The paper dropped to the floor. Someone slips a note under her door. "Stop asking questions." Marsha Duvall didn't panic when she read the note. She didn't cry. She didn't even flinch. She simply sat on the edge of her bed and stared at the bold, capitalized letters for a long, quiet minute. "Stop asking questions." It was a warning. But warnings only work on people who haven't been bruised by the world already. And Marsha had spent a lifetime being bruised, ignored, boxed in, and then blamed for pushing back. If they thought she'd scare easily, they hadn't been paying attention. She burned the note in the bathroom sink, watched the corners curl, and the paper blacken, until the message disappeared into ash. That's how people like her survived, by erasing the evidence, not the truth. She had no idea who had slipped it under her door, but it didn't matter. The house was full of polished whispers and power games, and the truth had teeth. She was close. Too close. The next morning, as she vacuumed the hallway near Grayson's suite, a memory surfaced, uninvited, but vivid. She was 12 years old again, in Mrs. Ellenberg's 5th grade classroom in Macon, Georgia. Marsha had written a poem about her grandmother's hands, how they moved like wind over cotton, how they carried stories without ever needing to speak. The class clapped, but Mrs. Ellenberg narrowed her eyes. "You didn't write this," she said flatly. "This came from somewhere. A book or a television show." Marsha had stood there, her poem clutched in shaking hands. She remembered the burn of shame as the other kids laughed. She never wrote another poem again. It was the first time she'd been told that her truth was too complex to come from someone like her. By the time she was 27, she'd learned to live with ceilings. Landlords who told her to be grateful for what you've got. Hospital administrators who assigned white nurses to more high-profile patients. Grocery store clerks who asked if she was paying with food stamps before they even scanned her items. The ceiling wasn't just glass. It was bulletproof. And she'd stopped expecting anyone to hand her a hammer. So now at 52, working as a maid in a mansion filled with secrets, being dismissed didn't feel new. It felt familiar. But this time she was going to do something with the feeling. That afternoon, the house staff was buzzing. Lorntech had scheduled a high-profile press livestream in the estate's library. Grayson was going to announce a new corporate partnership, possibly one of the biggest in the company's history. Cameras were set up, lights adjusted. A fresh logo backdrop was taped to the tall bookshelves behind his desk. "Tomorrow delivered today." Marsha moved through the room, quietly, dusting and adjusting the edges of the area rug. She wasn't supposed to be in the shot, but her job was to make sure everything behind the scenes looked perfect. No fingerprints on the polished wood, no streaks on the glass of the awards display. She wasn't part of the broadcast, but she made it look good. Grayson entered 10 minutes before going live. He looked worse. The fatigue that had settled around his eyes over the last week now clung to his entire face. His usually perfect posture sagged slightly as he sank into the leather chair. Bethany handed him a script, which he barely glanced at. A production assistant called out, "We're rolling in 5. Marsha took a step back behind a column and watched. Grayson's voice began steady. "This is a milestone moment in Lorntech's evolution. We are forging the kind of international partnership that—" He paused, blinked. His hand resting on the desk trembled, just for a second. No one else seemed to notice. But Marsha's eyes zeroed in. His voice stuttered. That will take our innovation forward." Another blink. His face paled. Then a slight lurch, his head tilted as if losing balance. A barely there droop of the shoulder. His hand clutched the table for support. Murmurs echoed around the room. A producer stepped in. "Are you okay, Mr. Lawrence?" Grayson forced a half smile. "Long week. Allergies," he muttered. The camera stayed on. The show went on. But Marsha didn't wait for the wrap-up. She left the room. Her heart pounded as she moved through the hallway toward the medicine bin. She had to be sure. Whatever was happening wasn't just stress or lack of sleep. It was deeper, more deliberate. and no one else seemed to care. The household kept a locked container for medication and medical supplies, nothing major, mostly for staff use, aspirin, burn ointment, allergy relief, but Marsha had memorized the combination weeks ago. She had seen the chef open it once when a line cook cut his hand. She waited until the kitchen emptied, then approached the cabinet. Her fingers were steady as she turned the dial and opened it. At first glance, everything looked normal. But tucked behind a bottle of Tylenol PM was something that didn't belong. A prescription bottle, orange, with a white label. She pulled it out carefully. Grayson Lorne. Neurocalm. Take once daily with food. Prescribed by Dr. L. Sloan. Marsha froze. The name hit her like ice water down her spine. Dr. Leland Sloan. She hadn't seen that name in years, but she remembered it vividly. He had been a brilliant neurology specialist at Emory Medical, famous for his work on early-onset degenerative disorders. She remembered attending a lecture of his during her training. He had died in a car crash nearly 5 years ago. It had been all over the Georgia medical boards. So why was his name on a prescription for Grayson? Her mind raced. Was someone forging scripts? Was this bottle even legitimate? Who had access to medication that specific? And why was it hidden? Marsha returned the bottle exactly where she found it, relocked the bin, wiped her print. Back in her room, she flipped open her notebook and wrote 3 lines. Dr. L. Sloan. Dead 5 years. Someone is drugging him. She closed the book slowly, eyes scanning the door. She didn't know what scared her more. That someone in the house was behind this, or that no one else even noticed. The label says prescribed by Dr. L. Sloan, but that doctor died 5 years ago. The house had grown quieter, but not calmer. Silence wasn't peace here. It was control, a performance, the kind of stillness that made you lean in, just to confirm something was still breathing underneath it. Marsha moved slower now, not out of fear but calculation. Every room she entered, she listened before stepping inside. Every corner she rounded, she scanned first. The mansion was a theater of expensive surfaces and manufactured smiles. But behind the walls, something was rotting, and she could feel the stench of it getting stronger by the hour. A week had passed since she found the prescription bottle with the dead doctor's name. She hadn't spoken of it. She hadn't needed to. Instead, she watched more. She documented more. Grayson had good days and bad days. Some mornings he was alert, sharp, the version of himself the media loved to quote. But other days he seemed hollow, disoriented, forgetting things, repeating questions. And the tremors were getting worse. She had started to notice patterns. The days he drank the tea left for him by Kyle's assistant were always followed by disorientation. The nights when he skipped it, he slept better. Marsha kept notes. Quiet, meticulous notes. Her notebook now had color-coded tabs, dates, cross-referenced observations. Not because she wanted credit, but because if anything happened to her, she wanted someone to know she had seen it coming. One afternoon, while wiping down the hallway mirror just outside the upstairs conference lounge, she overheard 2 voices. Pushed it through. Legal's reviewing the codicil tonight. Is the equity piece confirmed? Yes. 32% to the new VP. It's happening. Marsha kept cleaning, careful not to make a sound. The voices belonged to Kyle and one of the board advisors, Brent. The conversation was low, deliberate, dangerous. Grayson's still breathing. For now. A low chuckle followed. Marsha's hands trembled slightly. She leaned closer to the mirror, pretending to scrub a fingerprint that wasn't there. Her reflection stared back at her, still unreadable. But inside her heart thundered. A codicil. That meant the will had been changed. She already suspected something like this. But hearing it confirmed felt like a kick in the gut. Grayson, even in his current state, held nearly full control of Lorntech stock. If someone managed to legally secure even a portion of that before his death, they'd walk away not just with power but protection, immunity, and money no one could challenge in court. That someone, she was now certain, was Kyle Trammell. Marsha tried to dig deeper. She checked the household computer station late at night, after most of the staff had gone to bed. It wasn't easy. Passwords blocked her access to most folders, but she noticed something odd. One recently opened file, buried deep in the shared HR directory, had been labeled Transition Planning 2. She clicked it. Access denied. She tried again, this time using a trick she learned years ago. Open the document in preview mode, without full access. For a moment it worked. A spreadsheet opened. Names, titles, Dates. Then her screen froze. Need something? The voice behind her made her jump. She turned around and saw Bethany, arms folded, leaning against the doorframe. I was just logging cleaning hours, Marsha said quickly. Bethany walked in, clicked a button, and closed the screen. Let's make something clear, she said, voice icy. Whatever you think you know isn't your concern. You're a maid, not an investigator. Marsha didn't reply. Bethany stepped closer. Ask one more question about company business, and I'll have HR terminate your contract by morning. Understood. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Marsha nodded, calm on the outside, but inside, her blood boiled. She returned to her room that night and flipped open her notebook. She added a new section titled, Mode, Kyle Inheritance Link.
Bethany, Protector Enabler.
Grayson, fading fast. Unknowns. Assistants. Legal counsel. Cynthia. Her pen paused over Cynthia's name. The other maid. The one who had disappeared without a word. The one who, according to Raphael, had cried the day before she was let go. Something about Cynthia gnawed at her, more than ever now. What if Cynthia hadn't just been fired, but silenced? Marsha opened her old phone and pulled up the list of hospitals within a 20-mile radius. Cynthia had no family listed on the HR forms. Marsha had glimpsed months ago. But maybe she had resurfaced somewhere under a different name. She spent the next 2 nights calling patient intake offices, pretending to be a concerned relative. She used the story of a missing cousin. Latina, early 20s, domestic worker, might have gone by Cynthia Morales or something close. It wasn't until she reached Eastridge County Medical that the woman on the line paused. We did have a Morales admitted 6 weeks ago, she said, but the last name's now listed as Vasquez. No family registered, though. Marsha's voice caught. Can you tell me if she's still there? I'm not allowed to disclose that unless… I understand, Marsha said, forcing calm. Thank you. She hung up and stared at the wall. Cynthia hadn't just disappeared. She had been hospitalized. And she'd changed her name. The mansion was trying to bury things, but the truth had already begun to dig its way out. Marsha finds Cynthia's name in a hospital intake file, under a different last name. By the time the staff meeting was called, Marsha knew what was coming. It was the energy in the air, the way the other maids avoided eye contact, the way Kyle's assistant, Jennifer, suddenly stopped saying hello in the mornings, and the way Bethany's tone shifted from passive to poisonous, smiling too hard when she spoke to Marsha in front of others. The meeting was held in the small utility office, next to the wine cellar. Only a few key staff were present: Bethany, Jennifer, and Marcus, the estate manager. Marsha was summoned last. Bethany didn't waste time. We have a situation, she said, sliding a clear plastic bag across the table. Inside was a single diamond earring. Marsha blinked. What is that? We found it in your laundry tote, Bethany said too calmly. It belongs to Mrs. Lorne. She reported it missing a week ago. Marsha opened her mouth, then closed it. She hadn't done laundry for Mrs. Lorne in days. She hadn't even seen her room since the woman left for her Palm Springs retreat. And yet the evidence was right there. Fabric softener on the bag. A folded shirt beside it. The earring tucked neatly inside the shirt sleeve. Bethany leaned forward, eyes narrowed. Anything you want to say? Marsha's voice was low. I didn't steal that. We'll be reporting it to HR, Bethany said, standing up. In the meantime, we're suspending your access to all guest rooms, and I'd advise you to be very careful about what you touch from now on. It wasn't a suggestion, it was exile. Marsha walked out with her head high, but her stomach twisted in knots. That evening she sat on the edge of her bed, the overhead light humming above her. She carefully removed her folded shirt from her laundry tote, the one the earring had supposedly been found in. Inside the shirt's cuff, she felt something stiff, a receipt. Her heart kicked. She unfolded it gently. Dry cleaning receipt from a place in Midtown, dated 2 days ago. The same shirt had been professionally cleaned after the earring went missing, meaning someone else had handled it before her. She placed the earring and the receipt in a sealed Ziploc bag, slipped it under the floorboard beneath her bed, and took a slow, steady breath. If they were trying to push her out, it was because she was close to something real. They wanted her gone. But she was the only one still paying attention. The next morning, she called the Eastridge County shelter. Again. This time she asked if she could drop off clothing donations. She mentioned the name Vasquez just to see what they'd say. Miss Vasquez is here, the woman confirmed. You can leave items at the front desk. Marsha didn't bring clothes. She brought questions. The shelter was in a low brick building, tucked between a halfway house and a rundown laundromat. She waited until late afternoon, hoping Cynthia would be less visible during meal breaks. When a young woman stepped outside wearing an oversized hoodie and sunglasses, Marsha knew. "Cynthia?" she called gently. The woman flinched, turned. Her eyes widened, just for a second, then narrowed again. "You followed me?" "I didn't know where you were," Marsha replied. "But I remembered your name." Cynthia looked around. "You shouldn't be here." "They're trying to do to me what they did to you," Marsha said. "They planted an earring in my laundry, suspended me, but I know something's wrong with Grayson." Cynthia's shoulders sank. The hoodie no longer hid the exhaustion in her face. She gestured for Marsha to follow her inside. They sat in the shelter's common room. Cynthia spoke slowly, like each word cost her something. "I told Kyle something was off with Grayson. I saw the tremors, the confusion. I told him he needed to see a doctor outside the company." Marsha listened carefully. "The next day, they accused me of stealing an old phone from the guest house. It was ridiculous. But Bethany was there. She said she found it under my bed." "And you didn't?" "No. I never even went into that room. But it didn't matter. They gave me cash, made me sign a non-disclosure, said I could keep quiet and walk, or stay and have them call the police." Marsha felt her stomach tighten. It was the same pattern. Weaponize reputation. Create a false narrative. Erase the witness. "But before I left," Cynthia continued, reaching into her coat pocket, "I took this." She placed a small brown vial in Marsha's hand. It was unlabeled. "He took this in his tea every day," Cynthia said. "Kyle said it was herbal, but I looked it up. The shape, the texture. It's not anything approved. I think it was custom made." Marsha turned the vial slowly in her fingers. "You think he's being poisoned?" she asked quietly. "I think they're making him weak enough to take his name off the door." Cynthia stood, already backing toward the door. "You need to be careful," she said. "They don't care who they ruin." Marsha left the shelter with the vial zipped deep in her pocket. Her mind spun with questions. What was in it? Could she get it tested? Could anyone even be trusted? As the shelter disappeared in her rearview mirror, she glanced down at the small glass bottle resting beside her purse. "What kind of tea?" came with a sigh of silence. Cynthia hands Marsha a vial she took from the mansion. This was in his tea. Marsha Duvall felt the weight of that vial on her nightstand like a ticking clock. The fine brown powder inside, its purpose, its origin, haunted her. Cynthia's words echoed softly in her mind. This was in his tea. That innocuous sentence had pulled Marsha into a realm she could no longer ignore. Her body hummed with trapped energy, every nerve alert, every breath measured. She started that morning as she always did, quietly sweeping the corridors, straightening pillows, dusting the trophies in Grayson's library. But her mind wasn't with the cleaning. It was with the notes she had begun to keep, tiny, precise entries lining pages of her notebook, now spanned with timestamps, symptoms, and delivery times. She turned the page to a fresh entry, heading it "Dosage Pattern." At the top she'd taped a still image she'd printed, grainy but telling, of Kyle entering the study with a mug in hand. Below it she meticulously logged the anomalies. 8:21, 9:14 a.m. Tea delivered. 11:32 a.m. Grayson slurs a sentence on livestream. 8:23, 3:47 p.m. Afternoon tea from Jennifer. 5:03 p.m. Grayson cannot recall his own product name. 8:25 no tea, sharp and lucid during video call. Her pen hovered. She knew she needed proof. Not just a timeline, but a confession. That afternoon, Marsha retrieved her old flip phone, cracked screen, slow processor, dying battery. But the recording function still worked. She tucked it into her cleaning supply pouch, among rags and polish, ensuring it looked harmless. No one would suspect a battered phone hidden there. Her opportunity came later. She entered the kitchen at dusk, cleaning pots and counters. Her heart sank when she overheard Bethany and Kyle's voices, quiet, conspiratorial, discussing the timing of Grayson's decline. Bethany's voice crisp and condescending. "He needs to be disoriented before he realizes what's happening." Kyle's answer, even quieter. "Soon the board will step in willingly." Marsha pressed record with a steady finger. Her breath hitched, not at what she heard, but at the casual inflection of betrayal. These words were betrayal wrapped in corporate ease. That night she set her plan in motion. She opened her storage box and found the nanny cam she had bought years ago. Forgotten, obsolete, yet perfect. Disguised as a simple digital clock, she placed it on the top shelf in Grayson's study, hiding it behind a row of thick law books, dusty, unread, and unnoticed, but perfectly angled toward his desk. For the next 2 days, Marsha cleaned with a feverish rhythm, dropping by the study more often than her tasks required. She kept her eyes to the floor, her body small, her expression vacant, exactly as they expected of her. Meanwhile, Grayson's condition sloped deeper. On one day, he forgot where his morning meetings were held. On another, he paused mid-sentence during dinner, head tilting, hand clutching his glass. Kyle smirked next to him, guiding his hand gently, as if steering a puppet. Marsha wrote it all down. Friday evening came, and the house fell silent earlier than usual. She waited until the kitchen was empty. She retrieved the nanny cam, its light blinking quietly, and slipped it into her apron pocket. Heart pounding, she carried it to the basement, where she watched the footage on an old monitor stored among cleaning spare parts. At first it seemed ordinary, Grayson entering, sitting, drinking, but then, at timestamp 1403, the footage shifted. A shadow moved across the desk. A tall figure entered, face obscured, posture deliberate. It reached into a drawer, pulled out a small pouch, and without a pause, sprinkled a powder into the steaming mug, waiting on the desk. A fluid gesture practiced, not hesitation. Then the figure stepped back, brushing dust from their sleeve, disappearing into darkness. Marsha's breath hitched, and her jaw clenched. She replayed the clip. The silhouette's hair tied back, suit sleeves rolled up, movement purposeful. And then light slanted just enough to catch the side of the figure's face. Jennifer, Kyle's assistant. Marsha stared at the screen, unable to absorb or reject what she had captured. Jennifer, always polite, always invisible, now at the center of something monstrous. The betrayal stung deeper because it was so normal. Marsha had been dismissed her entire life, seen only as the background. But they hadn't noticed, even now that she was watching. They hadn't counted on her. She saved the footage to her phone. Drained, she copied the time and date into her notebook. 8:29, 1403. Jennifer captured adding powder to Grayson's tea. Film saved. Her hands were shaking, adrenaline clashing with something darker. Relief, despair, vindication. But she wasn't done. There was more evidence to collect, more details to tie together. And there was someone, maybe multiple someones, who'd go to any length to stop her. A camera in the study captures a shadowed figure, adding powder to Grayson's drink. Marsha stood outside the estate's main security office, her old flip phone gripped tightly in her hand, knuckles white. It was early morning, barely 6:45 a.m., and the staff hadn't fully arrived yet. The corridors were still, golden sunlight stretching in beams through the high windows, casting soft shadows across the polished marble floors. She had barely slept. The footage was too much. Jennifer, Kyle's assistant, had poisoned Grayson's tea in plain sight. And yet, Marsha knew the footage wasn't enough. Not in this house. Not coming from someone like her. She knocked gently on the glass window. Marcus, the head of security, looked up from behind his screen. A tall man in his 50s, graying at the temples, ex-military, perpetually skeptical. He opened a door halfway, not stepping fully into the hallway.
"I need 5 minutes," Marsha said, her voice low, steady. "It's about Mr. Lorne. It's urgent."
Marcus raised an eyebrow. About what? "I have footage," she said, from inside the study. "Someone's putting something in his tea." His expression didn't shift. "You planted a camera. To protect him." She answered. "No one else is paying attention. Because no one else is paranoid." She reached into her pocket, unlocked her phone, and opened the video file. The quality wasn't perfect, but it was clear enough. She turned the screen toward him. He watched. His jaw tightened. But when the shadowed figure dropped powder into the cup, he looked up. "Can't even tell who that is," he said, waving the phone off. "Could be anything. Could be a vitamin. Could be nothing." Marsha's heart sank. "I know what I saw," she said. "You're a maid," Marcus replied, his tone flat. "Not a forensic analyst. Leave the security to us." He shut the door before she could respond. She walked away in silence, fury burning in her throat. It was always the same. They never listened, unless it was too late. That night, dinner was tense. Grayson barely touched his plate. He looked gray, like the life had been leached out of his skin. Bethany sat beside him, smiling, correcting his occasional slip-ups. Kyle stood in the corner, silent but alert. Jennifer passed behind them, refilling his glass of water, dropping a tea bag into the steaming mug at his side. Marsha watched the entire exchange from the dining room doorway. Pretending to polish silver, her fists clenched at her side, she had recorded the powder, tracked the symptoms, made the connections, but none of it mattered. They had decided who she was the moment she arrived. The help, nothing more. Hours passed. The guests left. The lights dimmed. Grayson retreated to his study. And then, just past midnight, the house shattered. It started with a crash, a loud, echoing slam against the hardwood. Marsha, in her bed, jolted upright. Her heart pounded. She threw on her slippers and raced down the hallway, her instincts sharper than panic. When she reached the study, the door was slightly ajar. She pushed it open. Grayson lay crumpled beside the desk, his body twitching violently. His face had gone pale blue, lips turning, a low choking noise rumbling from his throat. She didn't scream. She dropped to her knees beside him, checked his airway, cleared it. His chest wasn't rising, his pulse faint. The tremors had stopped, but now he wasn't breathing. Without hesitation, Marsha tilted his head back and began compressions. She counted out loud. 1, 2, 3. Her hands pressed hard against his chest, again and again, just as she had done years ago, in another life, when she wore scrubs instead of aprons. She breathed into his mouth twice. Then more compressions. The seconds crawled. His chest jerked once. Then again. He coughed violently, gasping for air. She rolled him gently to his side. Footsteps pounded behind her. Marcus and Jennifer appeared, breathless. "What happened?" Marcus demanded. "He collapsed," Marsha said breathlessly. "He wasn't breathing. I called 911. Jennifer yelled, her voice shaky. Marsha stared at her, but said nothing. She didn't trust a single person in that hallway. The paramedics arrived within 7 minutes. They loaded Grayson onto a stretcher, ran vitals, asked Marsha what she saw. She answered factually, medically. She used the words seizure-like symptoms, unresponsive, possibly drug-induced. Marcus interrupted her twice. Bethany hovered in the background, arms crossed. Kyle never showed up. The ambulance pulled away. Marsha stood in the cold night, watching the red lights fade. She didn't cry. Instead, she walked inside, retrieved her phone, and copied the camera footage onto a second drive. Someone in this house had nearly killed the man they claimed to protect. But she had saved him, and this time doctors would have to listen. The next morning, news broke. Grayson Lorne had been admitted to St. Jude's private hospital. Sources close to the family cited exhaustion, a minor medical episode, and stress from business pressures. But Marsha knew the truth would soon rise. She had seen the way the EMT glanced at his blood pressure, the way the hospital staff's tone shifted after the first blood sample. By late afternoon, she overheard a call between Bethany and one of the legal consultants. They found something, some compound not on any prescription list. That was all she needed to hear. And then came the announcement. The corporate team gathered in the conference room at dusk. Marsha stood just outside, pretending to dust the doorframe. Kyle stepped to the front. Calm practice. As of today, he said, Grayson Lorne is stepping down from all executive duties due to ongoing health complications. There was no emotion in his voice, no hesitation, only ambition, only control. Marsha's jaw tightened. He had just tried to kill a man, and now, he was replacing him. The VP announces Grayson is stepping down for health reasons. The day after Grayson Lorne was rushed to the hospital, the mansion pulsed with eerie quiet, like a stage set after the final curtain had dropped. But Marsha knew the performance wasn't over. Not yet. She moved through the halls like a ghost, unseen by the same people who had called her nosy, accused her of theft, and whispered behind her back. Only now, they avoided her completely. There was fear in their silence. Fear, because she had seen too much. Fear, because she had saved him. But power doesn't fall without a fight. By mid-morning, Marcus asked her to report to the admin office. When she arrived, Kyle and Bethany were already seated, side by side, suits crisp, faces unreadable. Marsha, Kyle began, smiling as if they were old colleagues. We'd like to thank you for your response the other night. You acted quickly. You helped Mr. Lorne in a delicate situation. Bethany slid a white envelope across the table. For your service, she added, and your discretion. Marsha didn't touch it. What's in the envelope? A severance bonus, Kyle said smoothly. And a non-disclosure agreement. Pretty standard. You've been with the estate for nearly 6 months. This would allow you to walk away quietly. On your terms. Clean. Marsha stared at them, her stomach cold. She knew exactly what this was. Not gratitude. Not reward. Hush money. You want me to forget everything I saw, she said flatly. Kyle gave a small shrug. There's nothing to forget. And if I don't sign? Bethany's smile tightened. We hope you'll make the mature choice. Marsha stood, slowly. I already have. She left the envelope on the table. That night, she made a call. Cynthia had once mentioned a friend. A local reporter from their church group. Young, ambitious, always sniffing around for overlooked stories. Marsha dialed the number with shaking hands. Hi, she said when the line picked up. You don't know me, but I think we have something in common, and I have a story you're going to want to hear. The voice on the other end paused. Go on. They met at a diner 20 miles outside the city neutral ground. Marsha wore a plain coat and brought nothing but a USB drive and a hard copy of her notes. The reporter Amaya Douglas was younger than she expected. Late 20s, sharp eyes, a frizzy bun perched high on her head. She barely blinked as Marsha laid out the footage, the logs, the recording, the pattern of poisoning. Why hasn't this gone public already? Amaya asked, stunned. They'll bury it if I go through any official channel. Marsha replied. They already tried. You have witnesses? I have a woman in hiding, a man in a hospital, and a company ready to erase us both. Amaya leaned forward. I'll run it. But once this is out, there's no walking it back. You'll be on the record. Marsha didn't hesitate. Then let's begin. 2 days later, the story dropped. Headline: CEO poisoned from inside. Whistleblower Maid exposes corporate cover-up at Lorne Tech. Within hours, the internet exploded. Comments flooded the site. Some hailed Marsha as a hero. Others, more venomous, called her a liar, an opportunist, or worse. Another disgruntled employee playing victim, probably doing it for a book deal. No way some maid figured this out before doctors. But the story wasn't just words. Amaya had posted screenshots of the nanny cam footage. Jennifer's hand, the powder, the mug, the recording of Kyle and Bethany whispering about making Grayson tired enough. The logs, the receipts. It was all there. Marsha didn't go to work the next day. She sat in her tiny apartment, curtains drawn, the news looping on the small TV in her kitchen. Cynthia called to thank her. So did Raphael. So did 2 nurses from her old job, who'd read the article and finally believed her story about her wrongful firing. But not everyone was thrilled. At 6:42 a.m., a knock sounded at her door. She opened it slowly, heart pounding. 2 plainclothes detectives stood in the hallway. Marsha Duvall? She nodded. We'd like to ask you a few questions. Regarding the incident at Lorne Tech. Marsha stepped back, voice quiet but clear. I've been waiting. Marsha's face is on the morning news, and the police come knocking. By noon, the story had gone national. Marsha Duvall's name was suddenly everywhere, plastered across cable news tickers, trending on social media, popping up in opinion segments and morning talk shows. They were calling her the maid who exposed a billion-dollar cover-up. Some used the phrase like it was something noble. Others said it like it was a punchline. But none of it felt like a victory. Not to her. She sat curled on the edge of her small sofa, a cup of untouched coffee in her hand, the television blinking in front of her. News anchors smiled too widely as they dissected her life. Pundits debated her motives like she was a chess move. Political commentators, most of whom had never spent a day outside of their own privilege, leaned back in sleek studio chairs and asked into the camera, can we really trust someone who installed a secret camera in her boss's private office? Another replied smugly, let's not forget, she was fired from her last job in the healthcare industry for misconduct. That says something, doesn't it? They never said the accusation was false. They never said she was never charged. They never said she'd spent the last 12 years working twice as hard for half the dignity. They just painted her the way they always painted women like her. Angry, unstable, ungrateful. But Marsha knew how the world worked. The moment someone like her stepped out of invisibility and spoke too loudly, too truthfully, she became dangerous. And dangerous. Black women didn't get applauded. They got targeted. The smear campaign started slow, calculated. First, someone made a fake LinkedIn profile with her name and face, except the headline read con artist, opportunist, fraud. Then came the memes. Her old ID badge photo, poorly cropped and plastered on cartoons of maids holding poison bottles. One went viral with the caption, "Don't let her do your dishes, or you might not wake up." The comments were worse. The help with a hero complex. She probably spiked his tea herself. These people will do anything for attention. Some were more direct. "I hope they lock you up. You ruined a man's life. People like you should know your place." One voicemail came in just past midnight. Marsha deleted it, but not before hearing the hissed words, "You should have stayed in the background, like you were meant to." She stared at her phone for a long time after that, not crying, not even shaking, just quiet. The kind of quiet that sinks into your bones when you realize you're not being punished for being wrong. You're being punished for being right and unapologetic. Despite everything, Amaya didn't stop. The young journalist doubled down on the investigation. She brought on medical experts, interviewed former Lorne Tech employees, quiet ones who hadn't dared speak while the machine was running. Even a retired neurologist stepped forward and reviewed the footage Marsha had captured. "These are clear markers of intentional sedative interference," he said in an online panel. This wasn't exhaustion. This was chemical manipulation. But even then, the noise was louder than the facts. Until the call came. It was a press release from St. Jude's Hospital, delivered through secure channels. The spokesperson's voice was firm, unshaken. The lab had completed its full toxicology panel on Grayson Lorne. Traces of digitalis, a compound derived from the foxglove plant, had been confirmed in his bloodstream. Digitalis, a substance used in rare controlled cardiac treatments. A heart-impacting compound that in improper dosages could disorient, slow, or even stop the heart altogether. Not something found in tea, not something one could accidentally ingest, and certainly not something any doctor had prescribed. Marsha stood in her kitchen, gripping the counter as the statement played again on television. Digital. The same compound she had found in the brown vial Cynthia handed her. The same one Jennifer had slipped into Grayson's mug, on camera. It wasn't just a hunch anymore. It wasn't just theory. It was science, truth, proof. Everything shifted. The tone of the media changed. The smiles faded. The questions became softer. The language more careful. New evidence appears to validate whistleblowers' claims. Was the Maid right all along? Could this be the corporate scandal of the decade? Apologies trickled in, slow and reluctant. But some critics still doubled down, accusing the lab of manipulation, spinning conspiracies that the footage was staged, that Marsha had done it for fame. She didn't care. She had never wanted fame. She had only ever wanted to be heard. She watched from her kitchen as Amaya stood outside the courthouse, holding a microphone in one hand, speaking with a sharp, purposeful tone. "Digitalis has no business being in anyone's tea," she said to the camera. And today, for the first time, someone finally said it out loud. Marsha exhaled slowly. Then came a knock at the door. She flinched. For a second, her body tensed, preparing for the worst. But it was just a courier. No badge, no threat, just a sealed envelope with hospital letterhead. Inside was a formal statement from Dr. Weiss, Grayson's personal physician. Patient Lorne remains medically stable, under sedation for neurological protection. Consciousness expected to return within 24-48 hours. Immediate family notified. There was no mention of the company. No mention of Kyle. Only facts. Clean, clinical, and layered with cautious hope. She held the letter to her chest and closed her eyes. Finally, the truth was no longer only hers to carry. The next morning, just after sunrise, another envelope arrived. This one unmarked. Inside was a small USB stick and a printed photo. Grayson, pale but awake, sitting up in a hospital bed. She slid the drive into her aging laptop. The screen flickered, then loaded. Hospital security footage. Grainy, but real. Grayson Lorne, blinking his eyes open. A nurse gently stepping forward, asking him something off camera. His lips moved. Twice. No sound. The camera zoomed slightly, just enough to catch the words forming a second time. "Where's Marsha?" Grayson regains consciousness and asks, "Where's Marsha?" For days, Grayson Lorne drifted between darkness and fragments of waking memory. Faint voices. The sting of an IV. The smell of antiseptic. But one name stayed lodged in his mind like a quiet drumbeat. Marsha. When he finally woke fully, eyes fluttering open in the private wing of St. Jude's, his assistant Margot was sitting by his bed, notebook in hand, face drawn with sleeplessness. He blinked slowly, tried to speak, then rasped, Where's Marsha? Margot didn't cry, not yet. She simply exhaled, as if she'd been holding her breath for days. She's alive, she said. And she saved your life. Grayson closed his eyes. Not from fatigue, but from the deep weight of understanding. Everything had changed. For the next hour, Margot gently unraveled the threads for him. The video footage of Jennifer poisoning his tea. The audio files Marsha had secretly recorded. The timeline she'd built that aligned almost exactly with his episodes. And the lab results. The compound in his bloodstream, digitalis, was real. Not stress. Not burnout. He listened in stunned silence. They all knew? He finally asked. Kyle, Bethany, they didn't just know, Margot replied. They planned it. He looked away, his throat tightening. The betrayal? Yes. But what hit harder was the realization that he had seen Marsha every day, passed her in hallways, handed her cups, and never once considered that she was the only one watching him closely for the right reasons. He had ignored her, like everyone else. And still, she had protected him. Is she safe? He asked, suddenly alert. Margot hesitated. I don't know. Those 3 words were enough. Grayson didn't wait. He instructed his private security firm, not Lorntech Security, to find Marsha. Immediately. She needs protection. Real protection. Not later. Now. But they were already a few hours too late. Marsha had barely slept the night before. Even after the confirmation that Grayson had asked for her by name, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was closing in. Her small apartment was quiet, her curtains drawn, her phone turned face down on the table. She had taken every backup she had, USB drives, notebooks, printed logs, and spread them across her kitchen. She wasn't just organizing evidence anymore. She was preparing for war. Every timestamp, every note, every mug delivered, every name whispered behind doors. It was all here, documented like a nurse's patient chart. Only the patient was the man at the center of a billion-dollar empire, and the diagnosis was attempted murder. By midnight she was falling asleep at the table, pen still in hand. The sound of glass breaking snapped her awake. It was sharp, jarring. Not a dropped glass, not the neighbor upstairs.
This was entry.
Marsha froze. She grabbed her phone, crept into the hallway, barefoot heartbeat slamming in her ears. Her living room window had been smashed inward, shards glittering on the floor. The front door, forced open, the lock had been snapped clean. Her chest tightened. She rushed to the kitchen.
Gone.
Every file, every note, every vial. The box with her only hard drive emptied. They hadn't taken money. They hadn't taken valuables. They took evidence. She spun back toward the bedroom, heart thudding, when she saw it. Words scrawled across the wall, just above her bed. Black permanent marker. Capital letters. You should have stayed in your place. The sentence hit harder than the break-in. Because it wasn't just a warning. It was a message written in the same ink as every moment of her life. Dismissed, silenced, erased. The words weren't just about what she'd uncovered. They were about who she was. And what she wasn't supposed to be. She didn't scream. She didn't call the police. Because she knew better. Knew that someone like her, calling 911 at 3 a.m. about a politically explosive conspiracy, would end up being the one questioned. Instead, she called the one person who had shown her trust. Margot answered on the second ring. They came, Marsha whispered. They took everything. What? My notes, the drives, the vials, and they left a message on my wall. Margot's voice sharpened. We're on our way. I'm sending private security now. I have nothing left. You have us. Grayson knows everything. He asked for you. Marsha closed her eyes. For the first time, her voice cracked. I'm tired. I know, Margot whispered. Just hold on a little longer. As dawn began to glow through her broken window, Marsha sat on the floor, knees tucked to her chest. For all her strength, for all the evidence she'd gathered, the lives she had saved, someone still believed she was only meant to clean up after others, to fade into the wallpaper, to be silent and small. She had been brave. She had been smart. And yet the message on her wall told her what the world truly thought of women like her. But they hadn't erased her. Not yet. Outside, tires screeched as a dark SUV pulled up to the curb. Men in black suits stepped out, scanning the street with practiced eyes. Help had come. But so had the storm. A note is left behind. You should have stayed in your place. The courthouse loomed like a fortress, the gray stone facade imposing under a heavy sky. Media vans and camera crews snarled along the perimeter, their lenses trained on the main steps. Reporters clustered like birds, microphones and recorders extended, scripts in hand. Everyone was waiting for Marsha Duvall to walk through those doors. She stood at the edge of the crowd, shoulders squared, breath steady. Around her the air pulsed with a dark energy, a mix of curiosity, contempt and relentless hunger for drama. She didn't want a show. She wanted the truth. But here in the court of public opinion, the line between the two was already blurred. Reporters dressed in blazers and pressed slacks flanked her, shouting questions as she passed. Are you ready to be humiliated? Do you believe you still have a chance?
Miss Duvall, do you think you's being taken seriously?
She heard the tone, a blend of entitlement and sensationalism. She answered nothing until she entered the building. Inside, the hush was abrupt, hollow. The echo of her footsteps down the marble hall sounded small and fragile. The courtroom was austere, cool lighting, dark wood, a mix of modern hardness and institutional legacy. At the front, a bench where the judge presided, grainy carpets lining the floor, and beneath sterile lights, rows of seats filled with spectators. On one side, Marsha's supporters Amaya, Cynthia, Raphael and a handful of faithful old friends. On the other, Kyle's lean entourage, suited figures with expressionless faces. At the front of it all sat Kyle Trammell, calm, controlled, immaculate in a tailored suit. Across from him, Lorntech's legal team watched Marsha with eyes that said, "Stay quiet." The trial opened with crisp formalities. Judge Reynolds, elderly and silver-haired, made opening remarks about due process. The prosecutor, a tall man with a commanded presence, outlined the case. This is not a simple workplace accident. We are here because evidence indicates an attempt to incapacitate a man to seize control of a fortune. Kyle's attorney, Darla Yates, offered a rebuttal in hushed politeness, calling it conspiratorial scapegoating, the work of a distressed employee seeking attention through false narratives. The jury was sworn in. 12 observers, unsmiling, faceless, ready to decide a story of betrayal, power, murder and a powerful man's life, and a maid's pursuit of justice. Day 2 brought Marsha to the stand. She rose when sworn in, felt the weight of every camera lens in the room pinned to her, hot and accusatory. The prosecutor's question lilted like opening a rose. Miss Duvall, can you recount how you came to suspect something was wrong with Mr. Lorne? Her voice was clear. I noticed his shake, the weakness. I saw him falter once in a live stream. He collapsed later that night. And the smell, that insulin odor. I found a syringe. Then I found the prescription bottle. And I started recording. She laid out the evidence. The vial, the logs, the recording of Kyle and Bethany's conversation, the nanny cam footage. Every word felt measured, truthful. The jurors furrowed their brows, as if wondering what kind of invisible armor she wore to stand in that box. Cross-examination began in a calculated, chilling tone. Darla Yates slipped into the aisle with a folder like a cat uncoiling. Miss Duvall, she began, voice polite, her eyes narrowing. Before we go any further, I want to clarify one fact. You were previously accused of unprofessional conduct in your former healthcare role. Is that correct? Marsha swallowed. The memory cracked open. Yes, I was accused. She paused, voice even. It was false. Yates nodded, pen poised. Yet the record remains. And surely you understand how people might question your credibility. I understand, Marsha said, the words as gentle as iron. Yates turned to the jury. Let's consider who Ms. Duvall is. Someone who once lost her professional license under suspicion. Someone who then concealed a camera in her boss's study. She let that sit. Marsha's jaw clenched. She felt old wounds open. The old dismissal, the eviction notice, the mold in her daughter's room. But she held it in. Yates continued, softer. And so you reached out to media before notifying authorities. Marsha met the gaze. Because no one in the company would listen. If I went quietly, he'd be dead before tomorrow. The room reflected a quiet tension. Truth felt like thunder. Then came her character exposed. They brought up her eviction record. Snippets of social media trash. Memes. Toxic comments. A video of a local anchor discussing her sexuality. Her race. Her anger problem. Each insult dawned like chains. Discarded people like her. Forced to scrabble for scraps of dignity. And now they watched her lose the crumbs in court. She didn't cry. She simply endured. Cynthia's turn came. She looked thin, Warren. The stand felt too bright, too public. Prosecution. Did you confront Kyle about Grayson's symptoms? Yes. I told him something was seriously wrong. Defense. Smooth. Knives disguised as words. You admitted you stole from Mr. Lorne's home, an unknown vial, without permission. What proof do we have besides your shaky word? Cynthia stammered. Her voice trembled. I took it, because I was scared. I knew something was wrong. Yates leaned forward. A thief and a guilt-driven exile. This does not inspire confidence, she said as if verdict existed outside the law. Marsha's heart pounded, watching her friend unravel under manufactured doubt. Recess was a blur. Marsha retreated to a bench outside the courtroom, head lowered. Amaya put a supportive hand on her shoulder. Raphael brought water. They whispered comforts. Inside, people walked out shaken, some in sympathy, others with satisfied smirks. She fought off tears, not from defeat but sorrow. They were still bending truth, and she was alone in the middle. The judge called them back in. The afternoon air felt charged. Marsha's pulse was a storm, and then, the unexpected. A hush fell. A hush of disbelief. The back door opened. A pause in every breath. Grayson Lorne, thin and pale, entered in a wheelchair, arms propped gently, eyes scanning every face until they met hers. Gasps filled the courtroom. Some rose from their seats. The judge adjourned as shockwaves rippled. Marsha stood, body trembling, tears unbidden. He was breathing. He was real. Alive. The gallery media, jurors, spectators, held its collective breath. Marsha exhaled first. Her heart felt electric. He had come. For her. A surprise witness walks in. Grayson himself in a wheelchair. The room fell into stillness as Grayson Lorne was wheeled toward the witness stand. There was a soundless electricity in the air, one that made even the clicking of the court reporter's keys pause. Everyone turned. His skin was pale, but not ghostly. Thinner than before. Fragile in body, yes, but there was something sharp behind his tired eyes. He wasn't returning to save face. He was returning to speak truth. Marsha's throat tightened as she watched him. It had been weeks since she saw him alive. Lucid, aware. To see him now, pushed gently forward by Margot, rising like a man from beneath the earth. This wasn't just a witness entrance. It was resurrection. The judge nodded once. Mr. Lorne, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Grayson raised one hand shakily, the other gripping the wheelchair arm. I do. He adjusted the microphone. The entire courtroom leaned forward. The prosecutor stepped forward with practiced calm. Mr. Lorne, do you remember the events that led to your hospitalization? Grayson nodded. Bits and pieces. I remember feeling foggy. Confused. I started forgetting meetings. My left hand trembled. I thought it was stress, but it wasn't. He paused, glancing at Marsha across the room. It was Marsha who noticed first. There it was. Her name. Spoken loud. Spoken clear. He continued. Slower now. Everyone else chalked it up to burnout. A long year. Too many late nights. They patted my shoulder. Told me to take breaks. But she didn't do that. She asked different questions. And I ignored her. He looked down, then back at the jury. Because I didn't think someone like her could know what was wrong with someone like me. A hush settled again. The prosecutor stepped back. What changed your mind? Grayson's voice dropped slightly, but it carried. I collapsed in my study. I woke up in a hospital. They told me I would have died if not for her intervention. The paramedics said it. The toxicologist confirmed it. Someone was drugging me. Slowly, deliberately. He turned to face the jury. And the only reason I'm alive today is because a maid, a black woman who I barely looked in the eye, paid more attention to me than my entire board of directors, my doctors or my so-called friends. Several jurors visibly shifted. One woman dabbed her eye. The defense rose. Darla Yates approached slowly, that familiar cold smile painted on her lips. Mr. Lorne, she began, you've undergone a traumatic experience. Isn't it possible your memories have been shaped, let's say influenced by media narratives? Grayson didn't blink. No. Yates tilted her head. You claim Miss Duvall saved you, but she also recorded you without consent. She contacted the press before she contacted corporate HR. Doesn't that seem opportunistic? Only if you've never been ignored, Grayson replied. A ripple of murmurs moved through the crowd. She recorded me because she knew no one in that house would believe her otherwise. And she was right. None of you did. You called her bitter. You painted her as unqualified. You mocked her for being the help. His voice cracked. Not from weakness, but from restrained fury. Maybe if she had been white, or younger, or wearing a badge with RN again. Maybe then you'd have believed her the first time. For a moment Darla Yates looked stunned, caught in a silence she hadn't anticipated. She tried to recover. Mr. Lorne, do you believe the accused? Mr. Trammell intended to harm you. I believe he nearly killed me, Grayson answered. And I believe he would have succeeded if Marsha hadn't trusted herself more than she trusted the people in power. He turned to the judge. I'm not here as a victim. I'm here because justice means nothing if we only listen to the voices we're comfortable hearing. The courtroom was silent. When he stepped down from the stand, wheeled back toward his seat, every head turned with him. Even jurors looked away, not in avoidance, but in reflection. Marsha felt the tears on her face only after they reached her chin. He had seen her, finally, but before the moment could settle, the prosecutor rose once more. Your Honor, he said, we request to introduce a final piece of digital evidence into the record. Item 47B, the defendant's personal laptop, obtained via subpoena. Judge Reynolds nodded. Proceed. A tech officer rolled in a monitor and opened a folder labeled Confidential Trammell. As the first document appeared, gasps echoed across the room. Labeled Phase Plan Transition of Power. Date, 3 weeks before Grayson's first recorded health episode. Subfolders, Legal Safeguards, Board Manipulation Strategy, Post-CEO Media Rollout. The next file, Sedative Blend Proposal, Jennifer Bethany Delivery Schedule. And beneath it, timelines, formulas, dosages. It wasn't just speculation anymore. It was a blueprint. The courtroom exploded into murmurs. Kyle's face turned sheet white. Yates stood frozen. And Marsha, still at the edge of her seat, clutched her notebook to her chest like a heartbeat. Justice had never been handed to her, but now it was staring back at the jury in black and white. And for once, she wasn't the one on trial. The VP's laptop is entered into evidence, and it contains a detailed plan. The verdict came like a clap in a quiet room. Sudden, final, shattering. Kyle Trammell was convicted. Guilty of attempted murder, conspiracy, and corporate malfeasance. The jury's hammer resonated through the courtroom, sealing years of betrayal with a verdict that felt both impossible and overdue. Marsha sat motionless as the judge read the decision. It weren't vengeance she felt. It was validation. A word that had always danced just out of reach. The air around her seemed lighter, freer, as though the weight of all those half-judged years had lifted. Outside the courthouse, cameras roared back to life. Reporters flooded the steps. The air was electric.
Maid turned hero.
She saw what no one else would. Justice for the overlooked. Finally, they weren't doubting her. Now they celebrated her. As the crowds pressed in, Marsha stepped onto the dais with Amaya by her side. Microphones reached for her. Flashing lights punctured her skin. Reporters called her name. She felt like a ghost stepping out of a dark past and into a blazing new reality. She heard a voice behind her. Grayson's. He had been discharged that morning after tests confirmed no lasting harm had come to his heart. The public narrative, once full of ruin, now turned redemptive. Ms. Duvall, he said quietly, as they walked together toward their separate vehicles. I can't ask what you did. It's beyond asking. But I want everyone to know you are the reason I'm alive. Marsha's chest tightened. The words spoken by the man she'd saved were soft, but seismic. That evening, Marsha returned to an apartment she barely recognized. The facade of her home felt distant, changed by broadcast footage playing on her neighbor's TV through the window. Her reflection in the hallway mirror didn't look like the woman who had once been told she couldn't save anyone. The next morning, a chauffeur in a crisp suit arrived at her door, holding an invitation. She signed a form without knowing what she signed. Because when a black woman's safety and dignity are suddenly centered in a world that has conditioned her to be invisible, you take what you're offered even before you understand the magnitude of it. At mid-afternoon, she stepped into the gleaming atrium of Lorne Tech headquarters, no longer just as the Maid legended in the press, but as a guest of its CEO. Grayson greeted her personally, dressed in a crisp suit, and supported by a cane, still frail but radiating quiet strength. They were led to a corner office, glass walls overlooking the city's business district. Papers lay scattered on the desk as if awaiting her arrival. He turned to her. Marsha, I want to offer you something unthinkable. She blinked. Sir, I want you to officially join this company, he said. As an executive advisor for ethics and oversight. Not a title to flatter. I mean a place that gives you a seat at the table you were never even invited to enter. Her eyes filled. He continued, voice low but firm. You're the only person who saw what was happening in time to do something. And now, I want you to make sure no one else is ever dismissed the way you were. Marsha's hands trembled. But I'm not ready for all that public exposure, she whispered back. For the scrutiny, the backlash. He nodded, pained but understanding. You don't have to decide now. It's open whenever you're ready. She left the building with her mind spinning. At home, she stared at the envelope with the offer inside. It was more than a job. It was a statement, a recognition she wasn't sure she believed she deserved. Fear and loyalty warred inside her. She slept fitfully that night, dreaming of boardrooms and blank stares, woke to the article on her refrigerator. Hero Maid now executive, inside the radical boardroom offer. Her phone pinged. Messages flooded in, some celebratory, some ominous. Someone had compared her to the help gone rogue. Another called her a Trojan horse in a suit. Even in triumph, she felt unsafe. A week passed. The public narrative stabilized behind her. Kyle Trammell faced sentencing pending appeal. Lorntech's board began restructuring. But all of that existed in theory. What mattered was the moment she finally opened the letter again. Calmly, she wrote back to Grayson, accepting. Not for power, not for money, but to ensure that other workers, people like her, were seen, heard, and valued. And then came the biggest shift of all. A month later, press flocked to a grand auditorium in Lorntech headquarters. New branding was everywhere. The familiar slogan had been updated. Grayson stepped onto the stage. He was steady, stronger. A hushed anticipation filled the room. He looked out at the crowd, then directly at Marsha, seated in the front row. She sat upright, calm, poised. When he spoke, it wasn't just corporate spin. It was a pledge. Today we launched the Marsha Duvall Initiative for Safety, Oversight, and Integrity. A living memorial to the woman who saved me, and whose courage reminds us that no voice should ever again go unheard. The screen behind him displayed the initiative's logo, her name etched in bold, simple typography. Beneath it, a tagline, "See the invisible, protect the vulnerable." Some people gasped. A few gasped in reverence. Grayson continued. This initiative will audit internal practices, ensure transparent leadership transitions, and elevate underrepresented voices across the company. Marsha's breath hitched. Her world had tilted. What began in a place of invisibility had turned into a cultural reckoning. As applause washed over her, Grayson closed his eyes briefly, then spoke again. To those who dismissed her, who doubted her, who wanted her gone, watch now how we'll rebuild trust. Not just with her, but because of her. Marsha stood, tears in her eyes, surrounded by the very people she had once never met, all standing because someone finally listened. She wasn't just seen now. She had become a symbol. Grayson unveils a new company initiative, in Marsha's name. Marsha Duvall sat in the high-ceilinged corner office that once echoed with the tick of cleaning tools and half-whispered dismissals. Now her name shone in brushed steel on the door. Marsha Duvall, Executive Advisor, Oversight and Ethics. She traced her hand across the smooth surface, thinking of all the times someone had insisted she was just a maid who should stay silent. She had accepted this role, not for a title or applause, but for every voice that had gone unheard before she began to listen. Sunlight slanted through the paneled windows, illuminating a ribbon of possibilities in polished steel and stacked papers. The view overlooked the city she once crossed quietly before dawn, carrying a bucket and rag. She barely recognized the woman in the reflection behind the desk, but she did recognize the determination in those eyes. Every assessment policy she rewrote, every anonymous report she elevated, and every broken voice she helped reinstate, she carried them all here. Proof that change doesn't require flash, it demands courage. Marsha's days became full of quiet revolution. She attended board meetings, where decisions about company culture and ethics were weaponized by fiscal pragmatism. She asked questions executives hadn't dared to hear. How do field workers feel about their schedules? Do night shift staffers trust leadership? Why are reports of harassment falling through the cracks? Her presence shifted dynamics. Sure, the room looked fine, sanitized with glass and chrome, but when Marsha spoke, heads turned. Not out of fear, but respect. Executives, once accustomed to her silence, now listened. Engineers, custodians, interns, all began to find her door open. She created a hotline for staff whose concerns had been ignored for years. She advocated for transparent pay practices. She acted not only as an advisor but as a break in the dam. At her desk sat the battered notebook she had carried since the beginning of this journey. Pages were stained from sweat, tears, tea spills. It contained dates, notes, recordings, and reminders. If they dismiss you, keep watching. She kept it not as a trophy, but as a reminder of the cost of inaction. She returned to it when doubt crept in, or when a corporate memo threatened to bury the work of people who looked like her. The notebook was her moral compass, and when she reopened it, she didn't read about poison or hidden cameras anymore. She read about investments into policies, into people. The press called her the quiet catalyst. They talked of the woman who wielded subtle strength. She appeared on magazine covers and panel stages. Television anchors dubbed her the moral center of a storied billionaire enterprise. But it never felt like fame. It felt like responsibility. Whenever an introduction began with "Today we have Marsha Duvall," her voice cut through preambles. Just say I listened. Because that's what she'd done, listened while everyone else talked over her. Any accolades that came her way were met with reminders. This isn't for me, it's for them. For the night shift custodians. For cooks in break rooms. For the worker who kept floors clean but never felt seen. She often thought of that janitor who used to watch her docket her schedule while she scrubbed metals into brilliance. One crisp autumn morning, the Lorntech atrium unveiled a bronze plaque in her honor. It wasn't grandiose, only her silhouette embossed with a notebook in hand, and a single phrase inscribed below. Integrity doesn't wear a badge. Sometimes, it carries a broom. Custodians stood quietly, some wiping tears. Others took photos. One shy new hire traced the phrase with tentative fingers before stepping away. Marsha watched from the mezzanine, heart loud in her chest, and wondered at how a simple symbol of recognition could rewrite someone's life. Marsha's presence shifted institutional behavior too. Where once she had ducked into rooms unnoticed, people now rose when she entered. Executives stopped meeting behind closed doors about her. They sought her opinion now. Meetings were marked Marsha, present. Suddenly her voice was not a background hum. It was a bell signaling accountability. Standing at the head of those meetings, she offered logistics and compassion in equal measure. A supplier's dispute? She asked about their workers. A technology acquisition? She demanded a labor impact report. She built policy around people, harder, but necessary. Back in her old neighborhood, she visited the apartment she'd once dreaded going home to. The building still smelled faintly of bleach and memory. But the moment she walked through the lobby, she was greeted with nods. Familiar faces peered from their doorways. A woman on the second floor, Mrs. Jenkins, her old neighbor, stood when Marsha arrived. "You gave us a voice," she said, voice cracking. Marsha smiled, wiping away memory. "You always had one." Outside, the world had changed too. Her daughter, Camille, now accompanied her to press events. At a dorm interview, Camille grinned and said, "I tell everyone my mom saved a billionaire." Moments later, Marsha corrected her gently. "The real story," she said, voice low so only Camille heard, "is that I saw a man who needed saving, and I stopped pretending I didn't know." In a taped interview years later, a journalist asked her, "What would you say to your younger self?" Marsha met the camera with soft fire. "You might be invisible now, but that doesn't mean you don't exist. Pay attention, speak when you can, because someone's life depends on it." She closed her eyes, then looked back. You never know who you're about to save. At a leadership gala, celebrating shifts in corporate culture, someone whispered, "She's the reason I stayed." It was a young custodial manager. Marsha nodded, humble. She returned home that evening to her quiet apartment, filled with warm light and photos of community gatherings and notebooks. She sat by the window, gazing at the nighttime skyline. Then she spoke to the empty room, the echo of her own journey drifting into glass towers across the street. How many lives could we save if we just listened? And in the softness of that reflection, she realized that question wasn't rhetorical anymore. If you've ever felt invisible, or watched someone be silenced just because of who they are, don't scroll past this, because stories like Marsha's aren't rare. They're just rarely believed. Type yes if you believe in justice. Subscribe if this broke your heart.